Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's wrap up time, so let's go and have a recap of my September reading. So as usual, I'm going to start off this wrap up with the stats, and I'll have the timestamps down below so you can skip this and move on to the book talk if that's your preference. I read 7 books in September, plus I had a DNF as well, and over the course of the month those 7 books gave me a total of 3,457 pages read, not including those that I did for the DNF before I decided to put it down. Total for the year is now at 29,064 pages. The average page count for the month was a pretty decent one. It was standing at 494, giving me a total for the year, or an average for the year so far, of 522. And then the average rating, it was another good month for me in September. I came out of it with a 4.21 rating, giving me an average over the year so far of 4.05. For the series stats, I've now started 15 different series in 2023. I've finished 5, so I've got a couple to talk about in today's wrap up. I've decided not to continue on to book 2 of 9 different series, so that's not included in that 15 for the series start. So that's 15 series started plus 9 that I've decided that I'm not going to continue with the series, and I'm up to date at the moment with 20 series out of the 37 total in my ongoing list. And then the day since my last 5-star read, I've got not 1 but 2 to talk about this month, so that's now standing at 10 days. So for the books, as usual, I'll start off with the DNF. This one was for The Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell, book 1 of Legacy of the Mercenary Kings. This was a book on my 2023 reading plan, but it kind of ended up on there by accident. For some reason, when I was putting together the plan, I had it in my head that I had a physical copy of this, so I put it on my list of physical TBR books, so books that were on my bookshelf that I needed to get to. Didn't actually have a copy of it, so I'm not sure what happened there. I liked the premise of this one. It had an interesting world. There's a moon that's falling apart. You can see it, and I think it's the US cover. It's got this kind of shattered moon, and you have these various warnings where the bells ring, and 1, 2, 3, 4 all mean different things. So as to the severity of this kind of moonfall, essentially. So that was very interesting. You've got the Forgotten as well, with people who, I can't recall if it was mentioned or if I hadn't got to that point, they either have their memories taken or they lose their memories. And your main character is trying to find a cure for this, basically, because his mother is one of the Forgotten. He's also he's not a traitor as such, he's the son of a traitor, I think, so it's put a black mark on the whole family, pretty much, or at least most of them. So he's kind of looked down upon by society, and you've got various things that are happening with him trying to go through different kind of plots, basically, to raise money to pay for his mother's upkeep and to pay for kind of cures that he's trying out and things like that. I didn't really get into this one though, although the world was quite interesting, the premise seemed quite interesting. I DNF'd it at 15%. I just wasn't invested in the actual story up to that point or any of the characters. There were a few things that kind of outside of the book had kind of had me thinking, is this going to be something for me or not? There are guns on the, I think this one's the UK cover. There is a gun that is pictured, and it does turn out that guns are a bit more prevalent in this than some of the other series, where I can kind of ignore it, basically, because they're mentioned, they're there, but they're hardly ever in the actual story. They're used literally once or twice, but in this 15% they were mentioned already quite a few times. I've also got a good friend, Terry, who's read the series, and he said that the 3rd book really dropped off after he'd enjoyed the series up to that point. So in talking with him, he wasn't sure whether it was going to be something for me as well, and I trust his judgment. So with me really not getting into it, really not being invested in that first 15%, I decided to cut my losses there, put the book down, and go and pick up something else. Alright, so into the books that I did finish then, and first of all, it was the typical start of the month read for me. So for the last kind of 8 months, the first book of the month pretty much, or the first audiobook, had been a book from the Expanse series. I was buddy reading this with my friend Nina. We finished it in September. We had Leviathan Falls, book 9 of this series, so it's the first of the 2 series that I've finished in September. I'm not going to say too much about this one because I've been talking about The Expanse for the last 8 months. That's the way it goes. But with this one, it's a bit like what I've said in the last two, maybe three wrap-ups, really. It's kind of dropped off a bit, so having now finished the series, I can say that the midpoint, Book 5, Nemesis Games, was my favourite of them. It didn't get better from that point, or it went down after that in Book 6 and didn't really get too much better. This one I did give 4 stars to, so it was better than the last couple. Part of that is I don't know, not a nostalgia factor, but it did in wrapping up the series. It did have a better story and a better conclusion than the previous 2 books for me. So it was a bit of a disappointing finish to the series overall, but at least the last book was a bit better than the couple that came before it, basically. So glad that I read The Expanse. I'm glad that I've managed to finish it, and a 9-book series is quite good going. But I wish that I liked it more than I ended up doing. So then I read a review copy that I had of Talon Sister by Jen Williams. This is book 1 of a duology, and I didn't write it down. I can't actually remember the name of the duology, so I do apologise. But I really enjoyed this one. It sounded like it was going to be a good book. It was very interesting reading the synopsis, and I'm pleased to say it delivered on that. There are kind of 3 main components of this story. On the one hand, you've got the title, I guess, Talon Sister. You've got a 16-year-old girl who was taken in as a baby by griffins and raised by them, and she has essentially it's like a nest mate who is her Talon Sister. So you follow those 2 in one part of the story. You've then got a herald who you follow in another part of the story, and a couple of characters around her. The heralds are these kind of super soldiers who've been created by fusing Titan bones into human DNA, I guess, and they become super soldiers because they can go longer and harder without tiring. They also have certain abilities where they can form out of kind of energy, I guess, a sword and also wings. They only have a shelf life of 8 years though, and then they are kind of disbanded from the army. They are released, and they've got to find their place in this world, basically, where all they have known is war, because as part of the process to make them heralds, they lose all of their memories. So Blessed 11, or 11 as she is referred to in the story, she started to have kind of memories, and it leads her to Brittletaine, which is this large island kind of based on Britain, where the griffins reside. The third part of the story then follows again a group of characters. You've got a kind of scientist who is responsible for this work with these Titan bones, and you've also got someone who works for the Empress, who's kind of acting as her guide, but also keeping her in check. So the Titan bones, or the Titans, are these large kind of mythical creatures, of which it's believed only one remains living, which is the griffins. You've also got things like krakens, these giant bears, and things like that. So you've got the amalgamation of these 3 stories, and the way that they cross over I thought was really interesting. It was a very exciting read, one that I definitely look forward to reading the second book for this series. I definitely recommend Talon Sister. I've kind of rambled a little bit. I had to stop in the middle there because my ring light, the battery on it died, and I had to go and replace that, so I do apologise if that was a little bit jumbled, but I do plan to do a dedicated video review on this title, so you can learn a little bit more about it, a little bit more detail, and further insight into my thoughts on it. But 5 stars for Talon Sister. Definitely recommend it, and look out on the channel to hear a bit more about why. Next up, I did another audiobook. I can't remember if this was in the plan or if I just picked it up because I had the capacity to do so, but I read The Splinter King by Mike Brooks. This is book 2 in the God King Chronicles, following up from the Black Coast. So again, this is a book that I really enjoyed. I knew more about it because obviously I'd read the first book, but I was a little bit nervous going into this one because I thought that it was going to be a bit of a departure from what we had essentially in the Black Coast. So in there we have this raiding party, essentially, this nation pretty much. They come over, and instead of raiding, they want to settle. Basically, they want to live with the people who they're normally raiding. So it's a very strange story, as you have these two societies trying to get to know each other, to learn to live with each other, and so forth. There are elements of what's going on in the rest of the world, and that's where I thought we were going to be here. Although we do have that, we do still spend a bit of time with these characters from the first book, so I was really pleased by that. They send a delegation off essentially to go and speak to the God King to get essentially permission for these raiders to actually stay. And you've also got another delegation who goes off to one of their neighbours because they haven't been around. They normally come down from the mountain to trade, and they haven't seen them basically, so they want to send some people off to find out why they haven't come down to trade, is everything okay, and so forth. You've then got the other elements that I mentioned that you also had in small detail in the Black Coast. So I like the way that we expand on the world, we get to see those other elements, we get to see more of the physical world, while still staying very true to what we had in the Black Coast. I did actually think that the expansion that you got in here made this a better book, because it was a bit more well-rounded. In the first book, those additional parts of the storyline that you had were very small in comparison, so they felt a little bit out of place. But I thought this one did a much better job of keeping them all together, integrating the three kind of key storylines that you had. So definitely enjoyed this one. I did give it 5 stars because it was another really enjoyable read, and as I said, I listened to this one on audiobook like I did for the Black Coast, and the narration was excellent, especially with some of the mannerisms where they don't have personal pronouns, for instance, and there's a lot of nuance around that, the way that people refer to themselves instead of using pronouns. The key thing that you'll have, they will use their title basically, so you'll have either this man or this Thane or this prince and so forth. So it takes a little bit to get used to that, but I think the audiobook definitely helps with it. Next up was another buddy read, and it was another audiobook. Nina and myself have been looking to read this for a long time. We finally planned it in for September. This is Wolf Eater by Anthony Mitchell. Now, I'd heard really good things about this. My friend Laura McRae really enjoys it and will always recommend it if you give her an opportunity, so it does come highly rated. I didn't enjoy it quite as much. I thought that it needed a little bit more for me. It was a good story, a good world, some interesting characters in it, but I thought the stakes just weren't quite high enough for what I was maybe expecting, given the cover and the synopsis and what I'd heard about it. So it wasn't a cozy read necessarily, but it was a nice, easy read. It just didn't have that little oomph that I needed from it, basically. So I thought this one was a good read, one that I'm glad that I got to. I did give it 4 stars. It was a low 4 stars, but it wasn't quite 3.5. So definitely one that I would recommend as well. It's just not one that's going to sort of stay with me, I don't think, too much in years to come. I then went off track a little bit because I had a review copy come through, so I read Chimera by Herman Stauernagel. This is book 2 in Fractured Orbit. I really did enjoy Eclipse that I read, I think it was at the tail end of last year, and when this one came out, I jumped at the chance to slot it into my reading plan. So with Eclipse, I really enjoyed that you had a very interesting kind of world. You're on a space station, and the people on the space station believe that Earth is uninhabitable. They can see Earth essentially through the viewing portals, not quite windows, but on this space station you've got a view that is designed for them essentially, and they look down upon Earth and they can see that it's not green, basically, it's not habitable, but that is a falsehood because the image is fake. So you have various people who learn about this or start to get a bit of an inkling about it, and they are quietly killed off, basically. So the main characters that you follow are learning about this, trying to stay alive, trying to get off the space station, and I just thought it was really exciting and really well done. Here You don't have kind of that novelty value, because once you've got past that in book one, you kind of almost have to reinvent yourself, I guess, if you're going to have the same kind of suspense. So it wasn't quite as good for me. We're off the space station, we're exploring a bit more, we're learning about the resistance as people are trying to take the shackles off these people in the space stations, essentially. And I think that maybe I wanted a bit more from this. As a little bit of background, this was originally a much bigger book, but it's been split into two because it got kind of too big to be a single volume. So we've got this one, Chimera, out in October, and then in November you've got the second part of it, which I think is Resurgence. So I think with the two of them in combination, bearing in mind I haven't read Resurgence yet, I think you would get a much better kind of experience, and that's certainly what I'm hoping with. Reading them quite close together, because they're released a month apart, will hopefully give me that. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars because I did feel it was just lacking that little bit that, as I say, hopefully will be picked up again in the next book. Then I went back to my reading plan and finished another series with Pillars of Peace by Tom Dumbrell. So I read book 3, Where Heroes Were Born. This is the biggest book in the series. It's a bit of a departure from the series as well, I guess, because you're focusing on a different main character. Rather than the main characters that you've got in the first books, you've got one of the secondary characters is promoted to main cast, essentially. So we focus primarily on Francine. We also have another new point of view character, Locke, who's given a lot of room in here as well. And for me, I wasn't really as attached to them. I didn't really get on with Locke's storyline. Francine was good as a character, but I thought that the story that she had, the actual adventure essentially that she went on, didn't really work for me. I wasn't really invested in it. So although I enjoyed the series overall, I don't think any of the books really were massive standouts for me. They were all enjoyable. I will definitely recommend them. They are lighter reads. They are light on the fantasy. They are quite short. This is the biggest of the three of them. But I felt that for me, despite enjoying them, I just kind of wanted a little bit more from them, essentially. This book in particular, I think it was the one that I enjoyed the least out of the three of them. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Definitely still a good recommended book, just not one of my favourites. And then because I had a little bit of time left in the end of the month, I started on my October reads and managed to finish one of them, so go me. I listened to the audiobook of Curse of the Fallen by H.C. Newell, and it's another one that I had a really good time with. I really enjoyed the opening chapter when I read it as one of my first chapter reads videos a month or so ago. And I'd originally planned to put this into my September reading list and then forgot about it. So, I ended up doing it anyway instead of October. So I win. I really liked the expansion, essentially, that you got from that first chapter. I like the magic and the idea behind it, and the kind of themes of someone who's born with magic. They've used magic all their life and they're not able to use it because essentially it could lead to their death in a roundabout way. I like the way that was explored, and the things that happen to make this character question whether she's doing the right thing and whether she can or should use magic despite knowing what could happen as a result of it. Very vague, I know, I do apologise. But I liked the overall world that we got to see here. We had quite an expansive view of the world through some kind of magical travel initially. And I like that we had that, and I like some of the strange and fantastical things that you had, sort of creatures and things like that. So I enjoyed the world, and I enjoyed the things that were populating the world. I thought the story was really good. It was very well told, very well written, free-flowing, so definitely good there. The characters themselves, I really did enjoy. I thought they had good humour, good camaraderie between the friends as well, and I really look forward to continuing the series. It's one that I literally finished last night, so my thoughts still haven't really percolated on this one, so I think what I'll do is have a bit more of a think about it and do a dedicated review on this one, because I do have plenty to say on it. Definitely enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it. I gave this one 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5-star read, but it wasn't actually too far off it. So that was my September reading. How did yours go? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll be interested to hear what was a favourite book that you had last month. I'm going to leave you there for now. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope to see you in the next video sometime soon. Until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.